few years ago, I used to put in a few hours at a local bar. Like so many others in my hometown, that was my first job. It wasn't much, but it was still a job and it paid a little extra that helped with my college fees. And it was located by a secondary road, some 12 miles from the nearest town where I lived at the time. That road also provided access to the mountains, which meant that most of our customers were hikers and campers on their way to their next adventure, so there was no shortage of new faces and interesting people at that bar. And I'll admit, a fair share of cute girls, which provided me with much needed motivation to go into work the next day. Back then, I drove an old scooter that I bought with my first paychecks, so those 12 miles weren't that hard to make. Old as it was, that bike still gave me plenty of memories and I enjoyed the freedom. But when the weather was too harsh or I was just too tired from a rough shift, I used to take the shortcut through the woods. The trail had been carved out over the years by groups of hikers and quad bikers, so it wasn't the smoothest way home, but it served its purpose. And eventually I got to know those woods pretty well and found new shortcuts to my hometown. On one of those rough nights, there was a group at the bar that just wouldn't leave. They were a lively bunch ever since they stepped inside. New campers, I assumed, and it only got worse as they drank the night away. Long story short, we ended up closing at 2 a.m., whereas normally we'd close at 12:30 a.m. On top of that, we were under one of those summer storms that, if you wore a wig, you wouldn't leave the house. The wind was blowing so hard that it ripped the sign we had above the bar right out of its hinges and dragged it several feet across the roof before tossing it into the marshy parking lot. I remember Harry, my boss at the time, joking that he'd finally gotten that happy hour moving sign he always wanted. If it hadn't been for the heavy rain that drummed the sign into the mud in record time, he might have been right. Harry couldn't give me a ride home that night. Not that he ever had. But the storm was especially violent, and when I insisted, he replied that he really couldn't this time. This time, sure. He'd gotten himself a new girlfriend and said that he still had to drive 30 miles in the opposite direction, as he was going away with her for a few days. Maybe that was the real reason. Or maybe it was because Harry had never been the thoughtful type. Either way, I was on my own. So, we said goodbye, and each went our separate ways. He went on the secondary road, and I took the shortcut through the woods. Looking back, I don't know why I chose to take the shortcut. I don't know if it was out of habit or stupidity, maybe both. But it didn't occur to me that, with such a heavy storm, most of the path would be flooded beyond crossing. To this day, I still kick myself in the head for that stupid decision. The first part of that path included a series of hills with minor steep basins on each side. It could be scary to drive on it, but I was used to it. Still, one wrong swerve and down I'd go, to the bottom of God knows what. I'd barely started my trip when, not far into the shortcut, the bike started slipping and threw me on the ground 2 or 3 times. Not long after that, the wheels dug into the ground and the scooter became stuck, and no matter how hard I pushed the engine, it just wouldn't budge. It was like driving on quicksand. I began shouting, infuriated. But of course, and had to be today of all days, and every obscenity I could remember, as well as some new ones I came up with right then. I was still grunting them through clenched teeth as I stepped off the bike to make it lighter, and as I pushed it alongside me, shin deep in mud, under heavy rain, wind, and thunder. All I could think of was, damn everything and everyone. I was beside myself with anger, which was a rare occurrence. and with the sound of the rain and thunder all around me. At first, I didn't notice the high-pitched shriek nor the voices that seemed to come from the trees, as if they were a part of the storm. I couldn't say how long it took me to hear them. The rain and thunder did a pretty good job muffling any other sound, but when I finally noticed an especially shrill, horrifying shriek echoing through the valley to my left, I stopped on my tracks, and it was as if all my rage and frustration vanished that very instant. The shriek had been short, but it chilled me to my bones. All my attention was on the trees beside me from where the sound appeared to have come, yet I couldn't tell if it had come from far or near. So I just stood there for a while, I don't know how long, waiting to hear it again. It might seem like an odd decision. God knows I didn't really want to hear that sound again and be even more scared than I already was. But if I heard it a little better, maybe I could understand what it was, instead of letting my mind conjure up explanations, each one more nerve-wracking than the former. However, as expected, I heard nothing but that damned heavy rain, so I decided to keep going. After a scare like that, as calmness returns, it's normal to think about logical explanations for what happened. And that's what I did. Maybe my mind played a trick on me, I thought. Or perhaps a bird frightened by a loud thunder, even though deep down, I knew I'd never heard a bird make that kind of sound. I never paid much attention to local stories and folklore about those woods. I figured people only recall the bad stories because it's fun to scare children and those naive enough to listen closely. Yes, I admit it, I scorned people who believed in ghosts, monsters, and other nonsense. I took pride in it. I even enjoyed bursting the suspense bubbles with silly jokes when someone told such stories. Childish and annoying, I know. But that was before what happened later. As a matter of fact, after that night, I was never the same again. And to this day, I can't tell truth from nonsense anymore. I don't know what to believe. That scream or shriek, a horrible sound, whatever it was, marked the beginning of the end for my skepticism regarding all that. I was still having trouble climbing that hill and no longer cared about the dent on the right-hand side of the fuel tank. It could be leaking and I wouldn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. All I could think about was getting home, taking a hot shower, putting on some dry clothes and stretch out on the couch. When I made out a faded voice amongst the trees, I slowed down to listen closely as I couldn't quite tell where it had come from. After all, someone could be in trouble out there, or even hurt, which could explain the high-pitched shriek. Maybe. I was walking slowly and listening so closely that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My hearing was so sharp that it was as if the sounds around me became clearer, like when you increase the volume in an eerily silent scene of a video game. And right then, there came another shriek, so loud it made me jump backwards, as if an invisible giant's hand hit me in the chest. I dropped the bike and almost fell over it, but found my footing just in time. That shriek, or scream, had been so powerful it actually hurt me inside. I could feel it throbbing within my chest. I stood there for a few seconds, eyes and mouth wide open, staring to my left. Why was I standing there, staring at the trees to my left? Had it come from there? I wasn't sure, because there was nothing there. The rain was coming down hard, to the point that I could only see 8 or 10 feet ahead of me, even under the tree canopy. But such a scream had to have come from something that was right there beside me, so I just kept peering, waiting for someone or something to come out of the darkness. Nothing. I was on full alert, and maybe that's why I realized that I could still hear the faded voice or voices as if they were hiding behind the incessant downpour. They weren't screams or whispers like in the movies, although they were speaking low, like a low radio coming from the next room. I'd hear a voice coming from one side, then a different voice coming from another. They were coming from all around me, but how? And who'd be there in the middle of a storm talking normally, like a mellow group of friends at a bar? I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I called out for them, whoever they were, but got no response. If there was actually someone there, they were completely ignoring me like I hadn't said anything. At one point, I thought it might actually be some sort of radio because the voices faded in and out as if it was badly tuned or the signal was failing. They were so faint that I had to listen really closely, and even then, at times, I wasn't sure if I was hearing anything. I thought, screw this, then quickly picked up my bike and kept climbing the last few feet to the top of the hill, praying for an easier descent on the other side, even though all I really wanted at that point was to get out of there, go anywhere else. Once I finally picked the bike back up from the mud, I quickened my pace, but as you'd expect, my progress was very slow, and I was getting more and more exhausted. That's when I heard one of the voices clearly, and it sent chills running up my spine like an electric current freezing me inside. David, it said. I distinctly heard it say my name, not screaming and almost completely void of emotion. Just my name, and it sounded like my father's voice. No, it was my father's voice. Anyone can recognize their own mother and father's voice, and even if I had any doubts, what came next confirmed it. Come here when I'm talking to you. My knees weakened and I nearly dropped. I wanted to run away, but I was so tired and shaken that I could barely stand, let alone move. You see, what it said, I had a big fight with my father a couple of days prior, and at a certain point, amidst all the screaming, I turned my back and went to my room, at which point my dad shouted, "Don't you walk away from me. David, you come here when I'm talking to you." I remember that sentence clearly because after I slammed my bedroom door behind me, I sat at my computer thinking about it, and what a strange choice of words it was. I was so scared that I started to swell up with tears and was about to cry. No, I don't mind saying it, because that was my father's voice, but it wasn't my father. I just knew it wasn't. I had no idea what it was. All I knew is that it was real. It was near me, and it knew my name. As I stood there, obliviously holding the bike with an idiotic expression on my face, I was able to discern something in the rain and the darkness of those woods. The heavy rain reflected some light, just a little, but enough to realize that something about the trees in front of me wasn't quite right. I could only see their darkened shapes rising toward the night sky, but near the top, the trunks seemed to bend with the weight of something heavy, something that stretched out like a branch, but ended in a wider, bulbous lump. The same happened with the adjacent trees, once, twice, 3 and 4 times. What the hell was that? Whatever it was, it looked like... Writing it makes it sound even sillier, but the truth is that those bulbous lumps looked like heads, deformed somehow, but human still. I know how this sounds. It does to me too, even more than you as I recall it now. But in that moment, after hearing those voices all around me, seeing that made sense. I knew, don't ask me how, that the voices came from those heads. It was too dark for me to be sure of what I was seeing, but it's hard to forget something like that. Not to mention that, as terrified as I was, I couldn't bring myself to look away, fearing that if I did, those things would attack me. Then, I remember the flashlight in my pocket. I always carried one, but rarely used it. Avoiding any sudden movements, I reached for it, turned it on, pointed at the ground, and very slowly turned it upward and ahead of me. That turned out to be a very bad decision. Stupid. As soon as the bright white light illuminated the 2 tree trunks right in front of me, I slowly tilted the light toward the top and immediately stopped when I saw something clinging to one of the trees like an enormous, scaly arm wrapped around the trunk. The thing that I called a head would be just above it, but I wasn't so keen on seeing what was there anymore. Whatever that thing was, as soon as the light touched it, it exhaled vigorously, and the sound that it made, like a furious hiss, came from where the head thing was. I dropped the motorcycle, terrified as I was, and started running up the hill. That is, if you can call that running. The best I could do was shove my legs and hands into the mud, up to my shins and arms as I tried to climb that hill as fast as I could, sometimes standing, sometimes down on the ground. When I finally reached the top, I couldn't breathe fast enough to quench my thirst for air, tired and absolutely terrified as I was. What the hell was that thing? The question kept running through my mind in a frantic, endless loop. That and a constant command to get away, keep running no matter what. But my lungs were on fire, and I knew I wouldn't get far in that state. So I hid behind a tree just for a second, just long enough to catch my breath. From there, the path went down to a plateau that stretched for miles, all the way to my town. I could already see the houses that had lights on, but it was still far, too far to run, or even walk the whole way, tired as I was, and especially with the state of the terrain. I was jolted by a loud thud a few feet behind me. To this day, I never figured out what made that sound, but in that moment, I imagined it was the sound that the large, heavy arm that I'd seen would make as it let go of the tree trunk and landed on the marshy ground. Instinctively, I glanced back, peeking around my tree, but all I saw was darkness and heavy rain, so I turned back to face the plateau. I was thinking that I might make it if I just stayed away from the woods, but I could tell you that what I heard next were twigs breaking under footsteps, but I'd be lying. For one, the ground was too soaked and twigs would sink if you stepped on them, not break. And then, Those couldn't be footsteps. Even though it sounded like a giant making its way through the trees, the sound of twisting wood and branches breaking was coming from above.
David.
I heard it say my name again. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the right buttons on my cell phone to call my dad. I didn't want to speak to him after all the fighting, but he tried to call a few times, and because I ignored all of them, his name was still at the top of the missed calls list, which made him the quickest person to call. I heard the dial tone, and then, from above, I heard that thing that said my name twice take another footstep, this time closer to me, and then nothing else. The dial tone was still there, but in my head, it was background noise, as it took me a second to realize that last sound of twisting wood hadn't come from very far. In fact, it sounded like it came from just behind my tree, and I hadn't heard anything after that. I peeked around and above, and all I saw was still just rain and darkness. My father never answered. I learned later that the call went to voicemail, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. My heart felt like it would explode inside my chest. I thought I was going to die out of sheer panic right then and there, before that thing even caught me. It was close, so close I could smell it. That scent was new to me. I'd never felt it before in all the times I'd been there. A scent of rust and something dead, and it was making my stomach churn. Before I could tell where it was coming from, the sound of tree bark being torn immediately made me look up. And right there, a couple of feet above my head, I saw that same scaly arm from before, wrapping around the tree and tearing out another piece of bark. The trunk itself was bending. That was impossible. I know it was, but that's what I was witnessing. The worst, however, was yet to come. I remember feeling something snap under me, under my feet, from beneath the mud. And then I saw the ground itself rise, carrying me with it. The root of the tree behind which I was hiding was peering up through the ground beneath me. I rose but a few inches before I lost my footing and fell forward. I turned back quickly toward the thing that was chasing me, and finally I got a good look at it. That heavy, scaly arm was like a huge tentacle, and it was pulling my tree to it. I was able to make out other tentacles like that one on the surrounding trees as high as the first floor of a building, but those ended in a deformed jumble that resembled a human head. There were several of them looking in my direction. The closest one was staring right at me, and those eyes, they were a sickening shade of yellow, each with a small black circle in the center pointed directly at mine. Then the thing spoke in what I still believe was a failed attempt at imitating my father's voice. What came out was something like two voices speaking at the same time, one of which sounded like my father, whereas the other was demonic. The kind you'd imagine belonging to the devil or some nightmarish monster after it was put through a garbage disposal.
Don't you walk away from me.
Hearing that sound and what it said and its implications, was all too much for me. It obliterated the last bit of sanity, and I found myself mindlessly standing and running away, or rather, throwing myself down that hill. I was tumbling and rising again, screaming like a madman. I thought I was going to die there. I knew I was going to die there, and what a horrible death it would be, in the hands of a revolting, unnamed creature, far from my home, my friends, my family, and without telling them I'm sorry. I remember that too, how I wanted to apologize to my father for the fight we'd had, and for everything bad I had ever done. All I wanted was my bed, and to be in their arms and nothing more, one last time. But I was far from any comfort. Those gruesome things took a deep breath as if they were one, then let out one tremendous, deafening shriek, and I lost it. I felt something warm running down my legs, but it didn't matter. I didn't stop or slow down. I was about to be grabbed, dragged, and killed, or something worse that I couldn't even imagine. Soon, I would hear one of the tree trunks break, then a heavy thud on the mud, and that would be it. One of those giant tentacles would grab me or crush me under it, and all I could do was pray that it wouldn't be too painful, that it would be quick. However, what I heard wasn't a heavy thud on the mud, but a mechanical growl. The very next second, two lights jumped out from behind a boulder on the path several feet ahead of me. I was still waiting for the instant when I'd feel that fiercely pull back into the darkness of the woods. So it took me a while to realize that it was some kind of vehicle. Eventually, I saw a Jeep coming my way. The headlights quickly drew nearer and suddenly stopped, as if I'd been spotted at the very last second. The doors opened, and out came two young men with a look of sheer terror on their face. I wasn't all there. My mind, my awareness hadn't all returned yet, and only much later did I envision the sight they ran into when they found me. I was kneeling on the ground, with no recollection of doing so, screaming, my mouth gaping so much it hurt, hands rigid in front of my chest like a claw, staring ahead toward the two men from the Jeep, as if I didn't see them. I was told later that my eyes were open as wide as they could get, bloodshot and unblinking. I recall trying to scream, but I was already exhausted and voiceless, so all that I could manage was little more than a harsh grunt. I was still waiting for those things to snatch me. Once I was taken to the car and hoisted into the back seat, I was directly facing the top of the hill at the edge of the trees, where I'd clumsily come out of the woods. The Jeep's headlights were pointing directly at the tree I used to hid, and there was nothing there. No giant tentacled creature or floating human heads. No yellow eyes peeking out from the dark. Nothing but tall trees shooting up toward the sky, barely distinguishable from the next. Except for one. The tree where I hid was easy to spot. It was the only one that tilted, and its roots were showing, and several feet up, a big chunk of it was missing where the trunk had bent. Between that moment and nightfall of the following day when I woke up, my memory is a little sketchy. I can barely recall the ride home. As far as I remember, it was entirely made in silence. But I do have flashes of the two men's faces turning back from the front seat to face me, and I believe they might have been talking to me, probably asking me where I lived. I don't remember answering them, nor their names if I ever knew them, but I must have told them because the next thing I knew, I was at the front door to my house. My mother opened the door, and shortly after, my father came running out of the living room. After that, I was in the bathroom, rolled up in towels. After that, I was lying in my bed with my eyes open. I don't remember falling asleep, just waking up almost 24 hours later. I know this because I was told the time of night the two guys knocked on the front door, carrying me on their shoulders, and I saw the clock on my nightstand when I woke up. Beyond that, there was my bedroom window, and a few dozen feet beyond that, the woods surrounding our house. During all that time, I didn't dream, or if I did, I don't remember it at all, except for one thing. As I said, my memory of this part of the events isn't the best. It's been 20 years since it happened, and I still can't piece everything together from the moment the Jeep stopped in front of me. But every time I think back to when I opened my eyes that night in my bed, I remember the sound that woke me up. A heavy thud on the mud. Of course, many would say that I was in shock, that I dreamt about the terrifying ordeal I'd been through, and that this sound had been the last thing that crossed my mind before I woke up. And they would probably be right. But I wonder if they'd say the same thing about the air flowing into my room from outside. Like I said, I spent the whole day sleeping, and because it was summer, one of my parents must have come into my room and opened the window to get a little draft going. After I woke up, it took me a while to take notice of the scent coming from outside and pervading my room. Rust and something dead. Nothing too weird happened after that. I went back to work a few weeks later and never took the same path again. In fact, from then on, Dad drove me there himself every day. On one of those trips, he told me that the two guys that found me had decided, spur of the moment, to take the Jeep out into the marshy woods and have a little adventure. If they hadn't, where would I be now? Dead, or worse. He also let out that he'd heard the message I left on his voicemail, but I never got to know what was in it. And I never will. My father passed away recently and took that secret with him. Sometimes, I think that what was on there was so horrifying that he chose not to mention it. Since I never did apologize to him about our fight, I figure we're even. Besides, I never told my parents what really happened. When they asked me about it, I simply said I had a panic attack in the middle of the woods. I knew they'd take that explanation, because my uncle frequently had them and still takes preventive medication to this day to control his anxiety. So, my mother got hold of a good therapist and I started having sessions every other day. I didn't mind much. She was nice and I liked going. I felt like I could talk about anything I wanted without fear of judgment. Yet, even so, I didn't bring myself to tell her about what had happened. Maybe some things are too real to share. Maybe that was it. Or maybe I feared that by telling her, it became real again, as if I'd leave a trail in the air that the monster could pick up on, find me, and finally finish what it started that stormy night. I stopped taking the pills just a couple of days after I started. Why would I? I didn't suffer from anxiety, and my problem, if one could call it that, was an entirely different one. Little by little, the memory of that event faded and things went back to normal, as much as possible anyway. There were days when I felt good and it all seemed like a bad dream. Not long after that, I met a girl from one of the groups of campers that stopped by the bar, and I had my first summer romance. This was the first time I came back to this house in many years to take care of things pertaining to my father's passing. After he got sick, we decided to move him to a hospital in the city I live in now, with my wife and 2 children, and my mother moved in with us. It just got dark outside, and I've been alone since I got here, but in truth, I haven't felt alone yet. I didn't pay much attention when it started raining a few hours back, and even chuckled when I heard the first thunders while getting ready for bed. After all, it's been 20 years. But the storm's getting worse by the second. I used to love this kind of weather. Not anymore, though. Maybe it's because it reminds me so much of that night. Or maybe it's because this was the first time since that night that I heard that sound again. I'm writing in my own bedroom and the window's ajar. I began writing when I noticed the scent. But now I have to hurry, because not even a minute ago, under the sound of the heavy rain, I distinctly heard 2 mangled voices. It still knows my name.
You've reached the end of another audio tale. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Share it with others, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe and enable notifications for upcoming episodes. And if you're feeling especially daring, here are other videos you might enjoy. Watch at your own peril.